Joe Hines specializes in economic development and infrastructure, and he currently leads the Timmins Group Economic Development Practice company-wide. He has more than 24 years of experience in all phases of project delivery, site selection and analysis, prospect recruitment, infrastructure, and site development. During his tenure, the economic development practice has helped land over $3 billion with a B and announced investments with over 6,500 jobs created from national and international companies. Key projects include Rolls-Royce, Amazon.com, and the Vitamin Shop, amongst others. Joe possesses an in-depth understanding of site identification, selection, and evaluation, as well as infrastructure development and how they all intertwine to make economic development projects successful. He was the developer of a site selection and TG tier system SM process for objectively evaluating sites and utilize technologies such as graphic information systems, GIS, to help better deliver project results for our clients. Joe routinely presents to state and regional groups, as well as IDAs, EDAs, and local governments about what it takes to be successful in economic development. He is a board member of the Virginia Economic Development Association and a member of the International Economic Development Council and Southern Economic Development Council. In addition, Joe is a graduate of Lead, Virginia, and Leadership Farmville, and currently is a member of the Duke Fuqua School of Business Alumni Council, as well as member of the NC State Civil Construction and Environmental Engineering Industry Advisory Council. And with that, Joe, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. My marketing group does a great job of making me out to be something that I'm not quite sure I am, but yeah, it's fun to work with those guys. So, thank you very much for your time. As he mentioned, I do have a engineering degree and I do have a business degree, and it's the Duke Fuqua School of Business down in Durham, North Carolina, as well. So I'll give you a little bit about my background in just a second, so everybody understands a little bit more aside from that basic introduction. Part of what we're going to do today is we're going to cover trends in economic development, really who is your target audience, some of the basics on your infrastructure and park development, understanding that product and your target markets, and then preparing your community for success, and then kind of the site visit and afterwards. And, you know, one of the things that I recognize is that we as professionals in this business, you know, we're closing 4 or 5 or 6 deals a year, working with a lot of localities, trying to build their infrastructure and sites out and buildings out to be prospect ready. And so things that are very obvious to us because we are in the middle of all this might not be obvious to an economic development director who is seeing 1 or 2 prospects a year and maybe getting serious about a deal closing once every couple of years. So part of what we did was we try to incorporate that into this presentation to tell the story of what we're seeing and what you can do to be more competitive, and then how you can help close the deal afterwards. A quick overview about Timmins Group. We were founded in 1953. We've been in business for 63 years. We're over 400 employees. We are an Engineering News Record Top 500 design firm. We were just recently named a top 250, first time in 2016, and we're a wide group, hot firms, 100 of the fastest growing AEC firms out there. We do have extensive experience with economic development, site and infrastructure development, and fast track design build. As I say, we have 400 people who do this every day, every single day, from GIS through infrastructure site development. So we understand this business probably as well as anybody. Here's a quick overview of our services. We do a lot of work throughout the nation. As he mentioned, I head up our economic development practice, and we've been doing this for close to 20 years. I've been leading the practice since 2007. It's hard to believe it's been almost 10 years now. But we pretty much handle all elements of the site and infrastructure development through the product fulfillment aspect of things. Here's a map of where Timmins Group did our work in 2014 and 2015, just to give you an idea of our geographic reach. It's probably a combined, I think, 38 states in those previous 2 years that we have done work in. A little bit about my background. I actually grew up in on a farm in a small community called Farmville, Virginia. If you pay attention to the vice presidential debate coming up, in early October. That's going to be held at Longwood University, and that's going to be in the center of Farmville, Virginia. And another college you might be familiar with is Hampton-Sydney College, one of only 2 male colleges in the United States, is located just outside of Farmville. I am a licensed professional engineer, and I do hold an MBA. I have 25 years experience, 24 last year, and I did spend 5.5 years as a resident construction engineer, where we were constructing projects from water and wastewater treatment plants to water tanks to putting pipes in the ground, road projects, items like that. So I spent a lot of time boots on the ground trying to understand what it takes and the timeline it takes to get these projects done, because there's a big commitment when you commit to a project like this. I did used to play college baseball. There's a picture of me down there doing that. I did that as a grad student, ironically at age 29, much like Tim Tebow, who was trying to come out of playing football to try a baseball career out. So really, what are we trying to do with economic development? It's about the jobs and investment. And on August 16th of this past year, Governor McAuliffe in Virginia made 2 announcements. And these are projects that we have been working on as a consultant, both from a site selection perspective and then as the developer for the infrastructure and site development aspect of this. But Aldi opened a distribution center in Dinwiddie County, Virginia, $57 million, 145 jobs. And then Niagara Bottling opened up a $95 million facility, or is making a $95 million investment in Chesterfield County, bringing 76 jobs. What was interesting is both projects were within close proximity to the Amazon.com fulfillment centers. And so Amazon's building a number of these fulfillment centers across the country, but they're kind of like a Lowe's or a Home Depot in the fact that when they show up, all of a sudden it catches people's attention, and that certainly has helped facilitate and accelerate the development process within Central Virginia in that regard. Alrighty, folks, I'll circle back to just so you can see where we did work in 2014 and 2015. There's kind of a broad overview to give you all some perspective of our reach. I'm going to work back through this. Where ultimately economic development can lead us. This is a picture of me doing a master plan presentation for what ultimately became Rolls-Royce site. I will circle back to what Rolls-Royce looks like in 2014 versus what it was in 2006. So trends in economic development and a site selection, the consultant's perspective. First, I want to point out that prospects and consultants really are looking at regions and not necessarily silo localities. Now we're seeing trends where projects are moving in months, and as such, speed to market really matters. And what they need is ready-to-go sites, and a publicly controlled site really does rule. If you interject a third-party private developer into it, there's just a lot of back and forth and negotiations that have to take place, and sometimes publicly controlled does not necessarily mean publicly owned. Controlled means that you have a contract or something in place with the developer that you can sell that property for X dollars per acre, or you have the right to market and or sell that property on their behalf with certain limitations and restrictions. Obviously, the internet has transformed this process like it has transformed everything else. And incentives do matter, but that's really after you become a finalist site. Everybody talks about how important it is to have the information up on the website, which is true to a certain degree. But of all the site selection projects that we've run or we've participated in with site selectors, the incentive aspect comes up once we get down to our final 2 or 3 sites. And really, I think the crux of this all is that most local government economic developers and planners need to realize is really 100% of your success is really about 70 to 80% out of your control. And what can you do? You can control that 20 or 30%, and that's really what you need to focus on. So let's begin with the end in mind. I always track the Site Selection Magazine top location criteria. And if you look at 6 of their top 10 criteria, they're all somewhat controllable on that local and state level. Or you want to try to plan around developing around your utility and transportation infrastructure. What was interesting in 2012, the local economic development strategy popped up on this list. And I think that's important because when companies locate to a particular facility or locality, they want to know that you're committed to their long-term success and that it's just not landing the deal like somebody trying to sell you a car and then all of a sudden you don't hear from the salesman ever again. So why do you need to be prospect ready? There are opportunities lost. Caterpillar had made a decision to leave Japan in early November. They went and hired their site selection consultant, Mike Mullis, who some of you might be familiar with. And in the first week of Thanksgiving, first week of December, he was visiting sites. He basically said, hey, we're going to make a decision in February, and we're going to break ground in March. Okay, it was a $200 million investment, 1,400 jobs. According to Georgia, they estimated 2.4 billion regional impact. But what they were looking for was a 200-acre shovel-ready and cleared environmental site to put their facility. And they were ready to go, and they had a short timeline to get there, and they knew that. So opportunities one, Amazon. As I mentioned earlier, Amazon.com. We had a couple of facilities located near the two facilities that were located in Virginia. This was initially a $135 million investment, two 1 million square foot facilities, one 90 million, one 45 million, and 1,350 jobs announced. But to date, they've created over 3,600 jobs to date. What was interesting about this was the localities had 15 minutes with the executives in Seattle to pitch their site and their community. And that was pretty much what they got once they got down to the finalist site. And then they moved on with the next step. So if they didn't clear that hurdle, they weren't going to make it to the next step. So really, what does this boil down to? It boils down to how fast are prospects moving. And the trends we're seeing from 20 years ago to today, 20 years ago, the site selection process was roughly a 12 to 24 month process. People took time doing their planning. They would go out and investigate sites and whatnot. But now they're starting to see the trend where they just don't have the time to do that because of continuous gain in market advantage. Boeing made a decision to leave Washington State, and within 45 days, they had cut a deal with the governor of South Carolina to locate a new facility down in Charleston, South Carolina, and they made the announcement within 60 days. The important thing about this timeline to realize is these are the times from the date the locality or the economic developer is contacted until a decision is made. So that really emphasizes the importance of being prospect ready and ready to go. Of these 9 projects, which on average was less than 5 months from initial contact until the announcement, it was $3.3 billion investment and over 10,000 jobs. And then July 30th of 2014, Boeing announced another $1.1 billion expansion and an additional 2,000 jobs. So it's important once they get there and once you land that initial project, those can be game-changing projects and they will continue to expand. So a lot of people are like, hey, Joe, that's a big project. Do I really need something that big? Can you give me an example of something that's a little bit smaller? Project Casper, which was Acme Smoked Fish. They were in Brooklyn, New York. They needed to locate a new facility, new production facility, because they import their fish from like Brazil and other foreign countries where they farm and grow those fish. And believe me, there's an Acme Smoked Fish, which is not associated with the Wile E. Coyote companies here. But they had their initial contact with the locality in early June. The RFP response was 2 weeks later. Literally had the first site visits the following week, a short list of sites the week after that. 2 weeks later, they were doing their second site visit. And then a month later, we were in New York for a negotiating session with this company. They took us into a hotel room. There was Virginia and North Carolina. They brought everybody, hotel conference room. They brought everybody in there at 7 o'clock in the morning for breakfast. At 8 o'clock, they kicked North Carolina out, spent 2 hours with Virginia. At 10 o'clock, they brought North Carolina in, spent 2 hours with North Carolina. Then they kicked everybody out. They come back after lunch. Hey, this is what North Carolina's going to do. This is what Virginia's going to do. Give me your best offer. That timeline was for 2.5 months, a $27 million project, 104 jobs, which a lot of local economic developers would love to have on a 20-acre site. And that had to deal with a particular infrastructure issue that needed to be dealt with early on in their process. And North Carolina was able to win it because they were building a brand new water and sewer system, which could accommodate their process waste. So not only are the timelines for decisions going quicker because of the competitiveness in the marketplace and trying to get their product out there sooner than later, once they make the announcements, the construction process is going very quick also. We made a governor's announcement on August 31st for Vitamin Shop. Literally the week before the announcement, they were moving motor graders into the site. We had all the site plans approved and put them through all the appropriate review agencies, both state and local, and they literally could go to construction. As soon as the governor made the announcement, within the hour, there were motor graders starting up and they started moving dirt on the site. 3 weeks later, they had a pad graded site over 300,000 square foot, and then 2.5 months later with tilt-up construction, they had the walls up for a 312,000 square foot facility. And then 8 months 8 months later, we were substantially complete, and they were moving product in. What was interesting about Vitamin Shop was at full build-out, they were going to maybe send out 7 trucks a day because you can get a lot of those little packets of gold, small packages into a transfer truck for them to mail out. So really, who is your target audience? Your target audience is 4 really essential sectors here that we try to be aware of and make our clients aware of. 1 is the prospect themselves. 2 is site selection consultants, who are 2 to 10-man shops, really professional negotiators. 3rd, we're starting to see commercial real estate agents get into this business quite a bit because they have volumes of information that can help them, and then they have both international and local contacts and relationships with a lot of these companies that are looking to expand. And then the 4th is the preferred developers. And these are the gentlemen who are willing to sign the contract with an Amazon that says, I will deliver your building by September 1st, 2015 or 2016, or else I'll pay the $10,000 a day liquidated damages. So really, what are the prospects looking for? They're looking for that best business decision and a community that fits, or a site or building that fits. They want curb appeal and sense of place, and they want a place where their employees have amenities, where they feel comfortable. The site selection consultants and real estate brokers, they're looking for a site elimination process. As I've heard one of them say, I got 3,500 communities in the United States. I need to narrow it down to 10 within 30 to 45 days, and I usually need to narrow it down to 4 or 5 within 60 days. So, there's a quick elimination process. And a lot of that search has already taken place prior to that first contact, because there's just a tremendous amount of information available on the web, from labor statistics to basically site information, and they can understand where they're going fairly quickly, and within a short period of time know where they want to be, generally speaking, looking at regions, and whether they want to be at the intersection of 2 interstates, or whether they want to be in close proximity to a particular market. But at the end of the day, they need ready-to-go sites, utilities and infrastructure in place, thorough site due diligence, anything that can trip the project up from a timeline perspective they need to know about, and then incentives and commissions. But really, these guys are professional negotiators. They're the sharks in the water. They're going to try to get the best deal possible for their client. So the preferred developers, what are they looking for? They're looking for the elimination of unknowns and risks. As I mentioned, they're the ones who are going to sign on the dotted line, say we'll deliver you a 1 million square foot building or pay $10,000 a day liquidated damages. They want to have certainty of schedule. In other words, does the locality have a fast track permitting process in place? And then they want to have control of their development costs, both infrastructure and site development. What was interesting about Amazon is we had suspect soils for time of year construction. So we went to the local quarries and said, do you have 300,000 tons of stone dust available? And then what is your price on that? And they put that into their cost model, and it was a cost risk. They ended up using it. It was about $3 million for one site, $3.5 million for the other, but it was a cost plus contract with Amazon. And Amazon said, we need delivery date. That's more important to us than waiting 6 months for the site to be ready to go. And then how quickly can I start construction? Have they done all the site plan approvals and have construction contracts in place, literally to go to work as soon as the announcement is made? So we were working all these deals, and I was like, okay, what are all the commonalities here? We're seeing a lot of these deals take place, and we started laying out the logical development process. And this was a tiering system that I basically developed as I mapped everything out and basically said, hey, what is going on? What is common? What are prospects looking for? What is the industry telling us with all these deals? And there's a logical step process. So we did it into 5 tiers. We kind of tried to logically lay it out, both from a timeline perspective and an infrastructure cost development perspective. At what point in time do you start paying the big dollars? So tier 1 is raw land, willing seller, but you have no control. Tier 2 is a site that is controlled, whether that's a contract or owned publicly. It has zone, comp plan, minimal due diligence in place. A tier 3 site is a master plan site where you've estimated your cost. You've done a significant amount of due diligence. And at that point in time, you spent minimal dollars per acre to raise the value of your investment. When you go to a tier 4 site, you're talking about a certifiable site where you have infrastructure in place, property issues have been cleared, and you can really go to construct with minimal issues over time. And then tier 5 is I can literally put a spade in the ground tomorrow if I have my plans approved, and that's where Caterpillar went in Athens, Georgia, and that's where they were looking at in Virginia. So really, I call this gambler's odds. If anybody's ever known a professional gambler, and I guess some business people are professional gamblers too, you try to weigh the odds of success, and the odds of success for a gambler are normally 66% or 70% or better. If you win 2 out of 3 times, You're going to stay in business as a business executive. If I make the right call 2 out of 3 times, I'm going to be okay from a business perspective. So when we lay this out from a timeline of development with what we're seeing in the marketplace and how quickly these decisions are being made, and then your financial investment, really the tier 3, 4, and 5 stages are what you need to advance your site to, both from a timeline perspective and a cost perspective. Now, I understand that $100,000 to $250,000 worth of due diligence for tier 3 can be a lot to a local government. But on a dollar per acre investment, you kind of have to look at that. When you actually go to a tier 4 is when you make your serious infrastructure investment, whether that's building a road or extending water and sewer to a site. And then a tier 5 is a pad ready site where you've actually gone out and leveled a pad. I sometimes go back and forth between whether tier 5 is really ready. I think it's case dependent upon the particular locality or what you're trying to accomplish. And then so we've had people basically say, hey, what if I have, what if I do a pad, would that compromise me? And again, it's on a case-by-case basis. One of the things that we need to look at is what is the basic difference between product development and product fulfillment? And the way we look at it is tier 0 through 3, that's really product development. You're getting in the game at that point in time, and you're really lacking infrastructure and or sites. You have a substantial investment of time, money, and political capital. I think that's one of the most important things you have to recognize is political capital that you're spending on this. These sites are mostly lacking due diligence, have maybe some things that really aren't that many things missing, but you just need to go ahead and do. For example, a wetlands delineation on a site. Do you have a valid Corps of Engineers confirmation? Because it's one thing to go out and assess it, it's another thing to go out and delineate it, and then have the Corps confirmation where you know exactly where they are, and it's not going to trip you up in the development process. And it can take multiple years to develop this into a marketable product. Then when you get to a tier 4 stage, you're really in the game. At that point in time, you have a mature product that is ready to go, and you can proactively market that to the region and within the locality and site. And that site is routinely being shown to active prospects. So really, it's a matter of time. I try to use this like a car lot analogy. A lot of localities have a car sitting on a lot, but if you go open hood, you might see it might be missing an engine, or it might be missing a chassis or a transmission or something like that. So what we're trying to do is help localities basically build a complete car to put on their car lot to sell. So again, the major categories here are, I had one client say, Joe, if I have nothing, can you add a tier 0 to the system? We did that. That's site selection identification. Tier 1 is site negotiation. Tier 2 is site control and zoning. Tier 3 is master planning. Tier 4 is infrastructure investment. And Tier 5 is, are you shovel and pad ready in place? So really, where do a lot of people stand? A lot of people stand at tier 0 or tier 1. They just don't have a lot of product, and they don't necessarily understand that process and the importance of it to get your site ready to go, because the marketplace is saying we need sites that are ready to go. So why is it important for this? For small to medium sites, as I mentioned about the Acme Smoked Fish Company, these investments for 100-acre or less sites can be pretty substantial, as well as the jobs. And then the medium-sized sites, the investments start working their way up, and then you get into the mega sites, which I know is not necessarily as important up in the New Hampshire environment, but it's important down in the southeastern part of the United States. So potential rewards for your mega sites are pretty substantial. They can literally be in billions. But the categories are, mega site is generally anything that's 500 acres or greater is what it's viewed at within the industry. It was interesting because Virginia was in the hunt for Volkswagen and Toyota, and on May 23rd, 2012, I was getting ready to present to a tobacco commission who had funded $100 million for a megasite development program, and I walked into the hotel, and literally this was a headline the day before our presentation, and it really hit the point home of, hey, you really need to make good investments and get these sites ready to go. What I think is probably more relevant that everybody needs to understand is what are the basics of the economic development deal. And when a prospect shows up, they really have a good idea what their building or facility costs are, and that is the greatest certainty associated with it. And they know that cost almost down to the dollar. The site and the infrastructure costs are the ones that seem to have the greatest variability to it. And usually that's what every deal revolves around, and it's how much and who pays. And the land costs are looking for price certainty. They don't want a $40,000 acre piece of property going up to $200,000 an acre if the owner feels that the deal is imminent. And that's part of the risk you take with a private landowner without having a locked price before you enter into a negotiation is that sometimes once they think the deal is imminent, they want to go ahead and move up. The price to try to make as much money as possible. So the value of your investment, why do you need to do it? Again, it eliminates that risk for the prospect and developer. It creates cost certainty for site and infrastructure and development costs, increases that value of the property, and your competition is doing it, plain and simple. So for a private developer or a local government, you can see how a $250,000 investment can increase the net value of that property over the process of doing that work. But you always have to keep in mind that every deal is different. But if you don't make that investment, you really don't have an opportunity to get that deal. And this was the actual Aldi deal that's just announced, a $57 million announcement. But these were the numbers when we were doing the site selection process that we went through, and we evaluated the site and infrastructure costs, roughly 6.2 for site development, 4.1 for infrastructure development. The land cost was $3.2 million. We had a total package cost of $68.5, and the total incentives package came in at $9.2 million, and net project cost of $59 million and some change. So a couple things about your infrastructure and park development you need to keep in mind. Every site or building is unique unto itself, like every human being is unique. Every site or building is special to their locality, like every child is special to their parent. And we as engineers, we put a man on the moon. You give us enough time and money, we can do anything. It's just a matter of how much time and how much money, and that's really what is important to a locality when they're trying to develop a site. Some things you always have to take a look at, both at your locality and your site or building. As I mentioned, each site is unique among itself, and each site is special to their locality. It's kind of like who gets to stand up and say, you know what, your child needs braces or your child needs remedial education. But sometimes you really have to follow the Stockdale paradox. For anybody who knew, Admiral Stockdale served 8 years or 6 years as a prisoner of war during Vietnam. Sometimes you have to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be, and we see that a lot in economic development. A lot of people don't want to confront that politically, and sometimes you just need to take a hard look and say, yes, this is what our reality is when it comes to the cost of developing the site or getting into this game, and so you just need to be frank and honest with yourself and with politicians in that regard. So some of the basics of infrastructure and park development, kind of master planning for your future. These are all the basic elements of it: due diligence, transportation, water, wastewater, stormwater, private utilities, where do they go? Natural gas, fiber, telecom, electric. All the due diligence items you need to be aware of. These are the items that can eliminate your site if you aren't careful and you haven't addressed these, because they all enter an element of risk and timeline associated with the development of it. And it helps control those costs. Once you know where a wetland is or what your geotechnical is, and all those items, or any easement encumbrances, you start quantifying that information so you understand really what your true costs are. Transportation planning, really, it's about access to 4-lane highways. It's nice to have a 2-lane road, but you know how far away you are from a 4-lane road does matter. Intersection versus interchange, that traffic flow, that's very important sometimes. Have you done TIAs? Have you done turn lane warrants? All those items. But transportation planning, for the most part, is the longest lead time and something you need to start figuring out sooner than later. Water planning, you have to look at capacity, storage, both in distribution, is it domestic versus process use. What is your system pressure and what are your fire flows? Generally speaking, most people want 2,000 gallons per minute for 2 hours at roughly 40 psi, which means you need about 240,000 gallons a day of required fire storage. So when you see a lot of tanks in the air, they're normally minimum 350, if not up to 1 million gallons. Wastewater planning, you have to look at what are your pipes in the ground, what is your system collection and pumping system capacities. Design considerations, we talked about acme smoked fish a little bit earlier, and process flexibility. Food industry has a very toxic waste. It sometimes requires pre-treatment associated with it, and you need to keep that in mind as you're looking at what's getting sent to your treatment plant and the understanding of that. And we're seeing a lot of reuse take place. That's usually a cost-by-cost basis. It's not quite as sexy as people wanted it to be 5 or 6 years ago. But the reality is you can look at it on a case-by-case basis to see whether that works or not. Stormwater, you need to take a bunch of different things into consideration, whether it's water quality, water quantity, and then your erosion and sediment control. And right now, people were used to 20 years ago, 15 years ago, we're doing regional ponds. Now we're not seeing that as much because the regulatory environment for stormwater seems to be the one that is shifting the most over time and quicker than any other regulatory environment. These are some of the basics of stormwater that you need to keep in mind: topography, soils, drainage areas, impervious areas. Those are all the things that we as engineers kind of look at and like to take a hard look at. Then private utilities, where do they go? The important thing is, do you want a bunch of towers standing up with private utilities going back and forth, or do you want to put them in the ground? So we recommend that you try to keep them underground wherever possible, and basically make them such that they're aesthetically pleasing whenever you enter into a park or a site. And then you also need to think about curb appeal. What does this look like? You don't want something that is very ugly for your entrance. You want something that is appealing and that attracts people to want to come into that particular park. And then how will employees spend their days? This is an important aspect of it. What we're seeing is people are taking, like say a stormwater pond or something like that, or a topographic area, and they're turning it into like a venue for the local people to use, such that they can kind of create a little bit of a buzz around that piece of property as they're into the development phase of that, including walking and running trails and items like that. So you always want to take what could be liabilities in a park and turn them into assets, and using a stormwater pond as a pond that people can go sit at a gazebo and have lunch at is a great thing. So development cost is your money and the prospect cost. Again, it goes back to creating certainty in this element. And again, the more due diligence and planning up front, the easier it is to assess those costs and timelines. And the one that you really probably need to spend some time with is your utility service providers, whether it's natural gas, power, or fiber. They'll always tell you it depends. But the reality is, try to build a relationship with those individuals up front as quickly as possible to better understand what they can and can't do. And I'm sorry, I'm blowing through this real quick because I'm trying to get done by noon. But do you understand your target markets? These are kind of the flavors of the month. It seems like now you'll have some big announcements and people are like, oh, hey, we want to be the next IT data center capital of the world. We want to be the next logistics distribution capital of the world. You always need to build flexibility in whatever you do and whatever you develop to try to accommodate as many of these industries as possible. Shell buildings, if you build it, will they come? Mecklenburg County, Virginia decided to take on their own initiative, 50,000 square foot expandable to 100,000 square foot. We just bid the contracts, and we've actually got 3 active prospects before we're putting the building up. They're interested in it, so we're negotiating with current contractor to see if we can accommodate those existing prospects. A lot of people are asking, really, how important is it to have an existing building in place? I polled a series of regional groups, and the inquiries for buildings come in somewhere between 65 and 75%. But I think part of that is you just have a lot of people who don't quite understand the product out there, the development process. So when you have people who are looking to develop, that's an important thing, or looking to go somewhere, they want to know if they have an existing building in place. You know, sometimes an existing building retrofit versus build to suit greenfield site, you know, that delta can be as little as 60 to 90 days, and sometimes it matters. But then again, sometimes it doesn't matter, and you need to understand that element of it and what is driving that company to move as quickly as they are. Some of the key takeaways: what you're seeing is shorter timelines for decisions. You need to move quickly. A lot of first-time executives making a decision about their expansion. You don't have a lot of Fortune 500 companies don't expand that often, but when you do, that's maybe once every 10 to 20 years, and it's a lot of first-time execs who weren't involved with the previous expansion, and then they have a lack of understanding of the product and the market. I've heard one site selector say 75% of my clients show up looking for a building, 75% walk away with a site or build a suit. So it's kind of a little bit of an education process with prospects when they actually show up. So when you get right down to it, who is your competition? Your competition is the world, literally. When I was finishing up business school, we were in Prague and met in the Pilsen region to talk about some economic development issues. And they had a gentleman who was presenting on a former Soviet heliport, and they were talking about redeveloping that site, a 100-plus acre site, and talking about technology penetration, talking about labor force, talking about everything that you would have here in the United States. And that's what really hit me. Wow, we are in a truly competitive world when it comes to this type of a business. What's your competition doing? They're being aggressive. Okay, there are 27 state economic development site certification programs out there. A lot of people are saying that that is important. Some site selectors say it's not really, but really what it boils down to is getting your product ready to go is the most important thing. Volvo chose South Carolina for its first American factory, and that was a very significant deal that South Carolina put on the table to win that deal. So what can you do? You can better understand your product. Have you looked at your target markets relative to your sites? Can we do what we call getting on the green types of work product? I call them smart test fits, but every site shown on that building footprint shown on that particular site has been a building that we have built or developed somewhere from a building configuration perspective. So the site will work. It's kind of that 70% rule. Hey, can I potentially get a 300,000 square foot up here, or can I get a maximum of 1 million square foot? And I think that's important to realize about your site. If you don't have sites, what you can do, you can find some additional product. We are doing a lot of GIS site selection studies because the technology is evolving to that. We're using technology as an accelerator to help our clients in that regard. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind is that if you don't have product, you can go out there and try to find product. You're also looking for that piece of property that maybe there's an older couple whose kids have moved away. They don't necessarily want to come back home and take over the family farm or the family household. And those couple might be looking to sell it and move on. So that's kind of the hidden jewels that we're looking for. To give you an idea of order of magnitude of lack of properties, this is one locality we're doing GIS search for right now. We started off with over 33,000 parcels. Of the parcels that are greater than 15 acres, it's 247 or 0.74%, and then parcels greater than 100 acres, 130 or only 0.39%. So it gives you an idea of really what that lack of product is sometimes, especially when you get into the Northeast, because I know there's a lot of housing. Rooftops matter to economic development. That drives a lot of retail strategies, and that drives a lot of manufacturing strategies because they need to know that people are there to utilize their services and that are employable for their business. You also need to keep in mind brownfields. I know in the Northeast there's a lot of brownfield opportunity or redevelopment of sites. You see those cycle out. Stone Brewery came to an existing brownfield facility. It was the old gas works, and it was right on the river, James River, located in Richmond, Virginia, and it was a perfect place for them. And they were able to take advantage of some brownfield grants and redevelop an existing site that had a lot of robustness to it 20 or 30 years ago, and now it's cycling back up to have it redeveloped and be another bustling place again. So what can you do to prepare your community? I guess one is understand your product and your potential markets, investing in your infrastructure and sites and site readiness. Can you get a fast-track permitting process in place? Smaller localities, that's a little bit easier to deal with than in larger localities where you actually have 4 or 5 different departments that need to review plans. Have you removed any of that political process or public involvement wherever possible? Because that will eliminate a site very, very quickly. In other words, if you have special use permits or conditional use permits required, is that an administrative procedure or does that have to go through Planning Commission and then to your board or your council to approve? Because it has to go through multiple steps of political process and public process, that can be a negative for you in your locality. And then you need to understand your revenue, incentives, and your tax structures because you need to understand what your break point between a good deal and a bad deal is. And as I had one client telling me, Joe, I'd rather have no deal than a bad deal for it. So from a local perspective, local government perspective, you need to understand what those break points are because you have to be publicly defendable in what you're doing. And the importance of non-disclosure agreements. I just cannot emphasize that more than enough because really if people talk about a project or it gets out in the press, I've seen that eliminate sites more often than not. So increasing your odds of success before the prospect shows up, you need to complete all your due diligence items, clear all those property issues, get to the highest tier possible. You need to educate your elected officials and staff, have a fast-track permitting process in place, or at least know how you're going to go about that. And again, know your costs and revenue generators. So you're in the hunt the day of the site visit. A lot has happened right up to that point, but you got to keep in mind you're still one of probably 6 to 10. You need to make sure your site shows well. You need to put some presentation graphics together. You need to have your team of experts available and know your site very, very well. You want can-do people involved. Be a problem solver. You don't want can't-do people involved. And really, it's about surviving to the next stage. It's about the elimination survival. And you need to make them feel good, because this is where they're looking for, how does the community react to me? Are they open and welcome? Do they want me to be here? Do they not want me to be here? And then you need to ask questions. You always want to look for that decision-making criteria that they just aren't telling you about. Because I can tell you, with every company we've dealt with, they have something they're not saying to somebody that they're looking for as they look for these sites. So visualizing a site, what do you want the client to see? You want them to see something like this, that the site will work for what they're looking for. You got to keep in mind, when you go out to a site visit, this is most likely what they'll see. They'll probably see some trees in the field. Is it manicured? Can you go in and ride it? Can you look at these graphics and see what you need to understand? From a prospect or consultant's perspective, the day of the site visits, we probably already have our top 2 or 3 sites chosen in our mind. We're looking to validate the information we have, and we're looking for that feel of that community. And you got to keep in mind, you might be upon a negotiating game, and we might be gathering information for that next client. So those are things to keep in mind, but again, it's an opportunity to learn more about yourself and your site. So follow up, what can you do? Be proactive. Your site visit will start to blend. Send a thank you note. Big fan of written ones. Respond quickly to requests, and that's usually as soon as you get an email, respond to them, let them know you're putting the information together, and try to get them the information within 24 to 48 hours. And don't be afraid to be persistent, because we're all busy people, and your persistence sometimes pays off. So if you're a finalist site, keep in mind things will move fast. You're 1 of 3 or less. You need to prepare for a multi-party negotiation. Again, know your walk point. Where do you go from a good deal to a bad deal? You need a clear-cut MOU and agreement, because I've seen administrations change and boards and councils change, and people's memory starts getting fuzzy. So you need it to be as black and white as possible up front. Keep in mind confidentiality rules. As I mentioned earlier, every deal is different. You need to rely on the experts, from the engineers to the attorneys to the financial people, to help out to close that deal. If you don't get selected, one of the things, a lot of people get upset about that, but you got to keep in mind you did a lot right to get to that point. Ask for any feedback, and you need to use that success of getting a finalist site to help build political momentum. And as I heard one client say, work every deal until the very end, as you never know what you'll learn about your site or your community that will help you land your next prospect. A perfect example is there was a community in the running for Apple for a data center. They ended up going to another state because they could politically make some changes to legislation that the current state could not. Microsoft was looking at another site in that state. They found a karst issue, a sinkhole issue on the site, and they were getting ready to leave the state, and the state sent them to where Apple was looking, and then they ended up negotiating a deal with the locality that Apple was looking at. So what can you do to make your region competitive? You plan for and invest in your infrastructure, sites, and buildings. Those are the seeds of economic development. Speed to market matters. Embrace your assets. Be true to yourself. Don't try to be something you're not. And realize it takes time and money to be competitive, and that your competition is being very aggressive. So with that said, here was the original master plan for Rolls-Royce in 2006. Here's what the site looks like today in 2014. And again, going back to economic development credo, work every deal to the end. So I'm a big fan of Vince Lombardi and preparation. Having been a former high school football and college baseball player, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. I love Vince Lombardi. The will to win is not nearly so as important as the will to prepare to win, and that's the most important thing when it comes to this business. So with that being said, I think I stayed within my time limit, but I think I've used up everybody else's time limit by a delay, so I'm open for any questions, and anybody can send me any emails they want to.
Joe, thank you very much. I think, folks, I know we're at the end of our time, but if folks have some quick questions, they're welcome to chime in, either asking them in person or asking them on the audio or typing them in. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I can stay for another 10 or 15 minutes if you all need me to.
I have a quick question I wanted to ask is, Joe, I think you alluded to this, that in New Hampshire, I think that probably most of the towns and cities are at tier 0 or tier 1, with the exception of the Manchesters and the Nashuas and Londonderrys, etc. What advice do you have for those communities that are at tier 0 or tier 1 and are there's a lot of discussion at the council level or select board level of getting into the recruitment game? Do you have any sort of words of wisdom if you were approached by a tier 0 or tier 1 community?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most, well, my mother used to say the root of all disappointment is expectation, so you need to set your expectations appropriately. But I think the most important thing is to realize that when you're educating your elected officials, you need to basically articulate economic development as a long-term vision. And if you aren't willing to make the investments to work your way up to a Tier 4, Tier 5 site, your odds of success are very low. Yep. And routinely find myself saying in closed session to elected officials, listen, you could be making a decision today to spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars developing this particular site, and you're probably not going to have a prospect announcement before you're up for election again. So you have to keep in mind that, are you going to have a long-term vision for your locality that you're representing, or are you going to are you going to make investments for the short term that aren't going to pay off for the long term? And I think that helps play out in the press as well too. I think the press needs to be fully aware of that, because I've seen press in small town communities destroy any economic development opportunity because they're looking for controversial stuff. Hey, this board voted to spend $1 million and we have nothing to show for it. But I think it's a message that everybody needs to understand is it takes time and money. And to be successful, it's a long-term vision. It's a long-term strategy. It's not a political football that you're out there playing. Everybody needs to be committed to that long-term strategy.
Yeah. Yes. Joe, I just had a question, with regard to incentives. You may or may not know, but New Hampshire is not a big incentive state. Especially compared to the South Carolinas and the Texas and the Californias of the world. But in your experience, what types of incentives have been generally looked upon as favorable?
That's a good question. It really, as we're comparing site to site, what we're trying to do is equalize the expenditure for the client, okay? And every site, again, is unique among itself, and the infrastructure and site development needs are different. And again, it goes back to the slide where you have the greatest variability in it. You can get creative with your incentives. Like say take water and sewer, if you need to extend water and sewer to the site. That is something that you're going to generate revenue off of. So you need to understand what's going to generate revenue and what's not going to generate revenue for your locality, because there are two elements of revenue. That a state gets the income tax from the employees, so really it matters the number of jobs, and the wage rate for those localities matters to the state. And then the local government usually gets the real estate and the machinery and tools taxes. So you have to look at those in terms of what a reasonable payback is. We've seen people donate land because they have a long-term tax revenue incentive off of that. That's one thing localities have done. But you just got to figure out a way to get creative, because from a site selection perspective, we're looking towards the bottom line. And if it's a site in New Hampshire and maybe a site in another state are off by $5 million, then we need to know that in terms of what your land costs are or which infrastructure and development costs are. So there's a full range of incentives that can be provided. Sometimes it's within the context of helping people find jobs. But really, what we're looking for from a site selection perspective is boots on the ground, building costs, because those are the one-time costs that the client is trying to not pay for.
I see. And this is a follow-up question with regard to you alluded to dealing with New England types of projects. First of all, I guess the question is, have you dealt with New England projects? And if you haven't, what is the general perspective of doing business in New England?
Well, New England historically are not right-to-work states. Is New Hampshire a right-to-work state, or is it unionized state?
I don't think it's a right-to-work state.
Okay, yeah. From a big picture perspective, unions have a tendency to be a negative for companies, international companies looking into the United States. So that's one element, big picture philosophically, that probably needs to be addressed. You're seeing Michigan, I think, has gone from a union state to a right-to-work state recently. So other states are kind of starting to take a look at that from the bigger picture perspective. The other thing is just the regulatory environment, making sure that the regulatory environment is not too cumbersome or too process intensive, because really sometimes it's time to money. The great thing about New England is a significant amount of service markets are accessible from the New England area. As a matter of fact, that's part of what Virginia sells, is the fact that they have a significant port, and because we're the northernmost right-to-work state, you can get your product into New England within roughly a 12-hour drive from Virginia. Yeah. So, but you have a very robust market in New England that I think is very good, and it's very a very significant positive for it. And I think you just need to kind of align where the development process is, not to be too cumbersome with prospects or companies in that process, to make it a little bit easier for them, a little bit more user-friendly for them, versus saying, okay, you submit your plans, it's going to take us 2 months to turn them around. It's more of a philosophy locally of basically, hey, are we going to do everything we can to make this project happen for you in a timely manner? And that includes dealing with the state agencies if there are any environmental permits that need to be acquired there. And there's some federal permits I just can't avoid. Corps of Engineers is a federal permit, always will be for wetlands impacts. But then there's some state level type of permits that I need to acquire, and you just need to make sure they're not too cumbersome.
All right. Well, with that, and not seeing any questions coming up, Joe, I want to thank you very much for joining the Economic Development Academy again this year. Your perspective on site selection and getting your community prospect ready is always a very topical discussion that we have amongst our colleagues, and hopefully the information that has been provided, and also to let the participants know that this slideshow, if we can get a copy of this, Joe, we'll put it online like we did last year.